People have spent far too much time in the dark, but finally, an awakening has begun. We're starting to learn about the tools used by the elite to keep us financially trapped, and the number one tool they use to control us and maintain their dominance is debt. The financial powers of America and the world manipulate debt to lock not only individuals, but entire corporations and governments into a cycle of dependency. You've probably heard the saying, "The borrower is the servant to the lender." That's not just a proverb, it's an economic reality. Billions of people are drowning in debt, inevitably becoming servants to the financial system. Each time you take out a loan, swipe a credit card, or finance a mortgage, you're not just borrowing money, you're committing to years, sometimes decades, of interest payments that could far exceed the original loan. Of course, borrowing is sometimes necessary, but what the U.S. has been doing for decades goes far beyond responsible debt management. Right now, the U.S. federal government is over $36 trillion in debt. But that's just the beginning. State and local governments, corporations, and households have also taken on massive amounts of debt, creating a financial house of cards that continues to grow. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Economy Explorer. And don't skip any part. What we're about to reveal will change how you see the entire financial system. Debt, the engine of economic control. The U.S. federal government is now buried under a staggering $36 trillion in debt, and that number is growing at an unprecedented pace. Every year, the government borrows more money just to cover previous obligations, fund massive spending programs, and keep the economy artificially stable. But this isn't just a government crisis. It's a full-scale economic disaster that extends to households, corporations, and state and local governments that are all drowning in debt. The financial system is built on endless borrowing, making everyday Americans increasingly dependent on loans, mortgages, and credit just to afford basic necessities. Debt has become the engine of the economy, but instead of creating prosperity, it is widening the gap between the wealthy elite and the struggling working class. To understand the full scope of this crisis, just look at the numbers. Total U.S. debt, including government, corporate, and household obligations, has skyrocketed from $20 trillion in the 1990s to an unimaginable $101 trillion today. The government alone spends nearly $1 billion every single day just on interest payments, a sum that does nothing to improve the economy or benefit American citizens. And the problem is only accelerating. Over the next decade, interest on the national debt is projected to exceed $4 trillion, pushing the country further into a financial black hole. But here's the harsh reality. This debt isn't driving economic growth or improving living standards. Instead, it is eroding the financial future of millions of Americans. Wages have stagnated, the cost of living is rising, and homeownership is becoming an impossible dream for the younger generation. Small businesses, once the backbone of the economy, are now suffocating under high-interest loans, while large corporations benefit from easy access to cheap capital. This debt-fueled system ensures that wealth continues to concentrate at the top, leaving ordinary Americans to struggle under a financial burden they never agreed to carry. The wealth divide. Who benefits from this system? There's a reason why corporations and financial institutions thrive in a high-debt economy, because they designed it that way. Banks and lenders make trillions by collecting interest payments on loans, credit cards, and mortgages, while major corporations benefit from endless government spending that keeps markets artificially inflated and stock prices soaring. The result? The financial elite continue to accumulate wealth while everyday Americans sink deeper into financial ruin. Right now, total consumer debt in the U.S. has reached an all-time high of $17.5 trillion, a number that grows larger every single day. Households are struggling under the weight of credit card balances, student loans, and skyrocketing mortgage costs, all while wages fail to keep pace with inflation. The average American household now carries over $270,000 in total debt, more than most people will earn in their lifetime. And for millions of Americans, the dream of homeownership is slipping away entirely. 30-year mortgage rates have soared past 7%, making it nearly impossible for first-time buyers to afford a home. Meanwhile, while the working class fights to stay afloat, corporations and their executives are thriving. Decades ago, a company's success meant better wages, job security, and long-term prosperity for employees. But in today's debt-driven economy, profits are hoarded at the top, and the divide between workers and corporate leadership has never been more extreme. In 1950, the average CEO made about 30 times the salary of a worker. Today, that number has skyrocketed to over 268 times. The financial gains of the past few decades have overwhelmingly benefited the wealthiest individuals and shareholders, while ordinary workers continue to fall behind. The result? On paper, the economy looks strong. Corporate earnings continue to break records, the stock market stays inflated, and the government points to economic growth as proof that everything is fine. But in reality, millions of Americans are being left behind. More people are working multiple jobs just to cover basic expenses. Household savings have dwindled to historic lows, and an entire generation is being forced into a financial future built on debt, instability, and uncertainty. The globalization factor. Why wages are stagnant. While debt levels continue to rise, wages have failed to keep up, leaving millions of Americans struggling just to maintain their standard of living. The reason? Globalization, automation, and outsourcing. Three forces that have completely reshaped the job market, devalued American labor, and handed corporations the ability to chase profits at the expense of the working class. For decades, U.S. companies have outsourced jobs to lower-wage countries, where workers earn just a fraction of what American employees would be paid. A factory worker in the United States who once earned a livable middle-class wage with benefits has now been replaced by a worker in another country earning just 10% of that salary, without health insurance, retirement plans, or labor protections. Corporate executives call this efficiency. But in reality, it's a race to the bottom that systematically drives down wages and eliminates stable, well-paying jobs at home. But outsourcing isn't the only problem. Artificial intelligence and robotics are rapidly replacing entire job sectors, making millions of careers obsolete overnight. From warehouse workers to accountants, automation is taking over roles that once provided steady employment for middle-class Americans. Companies now prioritize machines over people, slashing labor costs while increasing profit margins, all while failing to reinvest in their workforce. And yet, despite all of this, the economy appears to be growing. How? The answer is simple: debt. The U.S. economy is now more dependent than ever on consumer spending, meaning that in order to maintain the illusion of growth, Americans must continue borrowing and spending money they don't have. People are forced to take on higher credit card balances, massive student loans, and unaffordable mortgages just to sustain a lifestyle that was once achievable on a single income. This hollowing out of the American workforce is not an accident. It's a direct consequence of policies that prioritize corporate interests over economic stability. Instead of investing in American workers, corporations chase the cheapest labor and the highest automation, while politicians push for trade policies that only benefit multinational giants. And in the end, it's everyday people who are left footing the bill, struggling with stagnant wages, rising costs, and an economy built on unsustainable debt. The real cost of debt: inflation, taxes, and your future. There is only one way to pay off the national debt, and none of the options come without serious consequences. The government can raise taxes, but that takes money directly out of the pockets of workers and businesses, slowing economic growth and discouraging investment. It can print more money, but that fuels inflation, making everyday essentials more expensive while wages struggle to keep up. Or it can cut spending, but that often leads to political and economic turmoil as essential programs and public services face severe reductions. And right now, the government is doing all three. Taxes are rising, more money is being pumped into the economy, and spending cuts are looming, all while debt continues to spiral out of control. The silent tax of inflation has already eroded the value of savings, with the cost of food, housing, and energy skyrocketing at double-digit rates over the past 5 years. More than 4 million children in the U.S. now rely on food stamps as rising costs push families to the brink of financial ruin. Homelessness is increasing at record levels, with major cities reporting an all-time high in people unable to afford rent. Yet, despite all of this, the system keeps functioning exactly as intended. Debt doesn't work as a tool to build prosperity. It serves as a mechanism to redistribute wealth, but not in the way most people assume. Instead of helping working-class Americans, it systematically transfers resources from the bottom 90% to the top 10%, concentrating wealth in the hands of the financial elite while leaving the majority of the population trapped in a cycle of economic dependency. The path forward. Can we fix this? The only way to break this cycle is through fiscal responsibility, something that has been ignored for far too long. Government spending must be brought under control to prevent future generations from inheriting a nation burdened by endless debt and rising interest payments that consume an ever-growing portion of the economy. Reckless borrowing and deficit spending have created a financial time bomb, and unless action is taken, it will be ordinary Americans, not politicians or corporations, who pay the price. But reducing spending alone isn't enough. Corporations must also be held accountable for outsourcing jobs and suppressing wages, practices that have left American workers struggling to compete in a global economy that prioritizes profits over people. Decades of offshoring have gutted industries, while wage stagnation has made it nearly impossible for working-class families to keep up with the rising cost of living. The workforce must demand better, higher pay, stronger benefits, and real protections that prevent companies from exploiting cheap labor overseas while neglecting their own employees at home. America's economic strength is tied directly to its fiscal health, and if we continue ignoring these issues, the consequences will only grow more severe. The country cannot afford to keep kicking this can down the road, pretending the debt crisis will fix itself. The time for action is now. What do you think? Do you believe the U.S. economy can escape this debt-driven crisis? What solutions do you think policymakers should implement? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Economy Explorer for more in-depth economic analysis. Thanks for watching.